The folder hit the floor before Kofi even registered what was happening. Papers exploded across the polished hospital tiles, white sheets fanning out like broken wings, photographs spinning free. A child's crayon drawing skidding under a nearby bench. And in the center of it all stood Amara, frozen, her eyes wide, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. Kofi stood 10 feet away and could not move. 6 years. 6 years of asking himself why. 6 years of building walls so high that even he forgot what it felt like to stand in the open. 6 years of replaying the last conversation he ever had with her, the one where her phone went straight to voicemail. And then the day after, when someone who claimed to be her cousin called to say she had left the country. No goodbye, no letter, no reason, and now she was here, in Seoul General Hospital. In the same corridor where Kofi had walked every Tuesday for the past 3 months to visit his father who was recovering from a stroke. He had not expected this. He had not prepared for this. His briefcase hung loosely from his fingers. His tie was slightly loose from a long morning of meetings. His mind, which was usually razor-sharp, the kind that had built a mid-sized import-export business from nothing at 26, was suddenly, completely, devastatingly blank. Amara crouched to the floor, scrambling to gather the papers, her long braids falling over her shoulders. She had not seen him yet. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently. The way they always did when she was nervous, that habit she had of overcompensating with action when emotion threatened to surface. And then the little boy beside her crouched too. He was small, maybe 4, maybe 5. He wore a yellow jacket and tiny white sneakers, and when he bent to pick up a paper, he looked up at his mother with a grin so wide and so familiar that Kofi felt the air leave his lungs like something physical had struck him. The dimple, the deep, singular dimple on the left cheek, the one Kofi's mother had always teased him about. The one that appeared only when he smiled with his whole face, not just his mouth. The little boy had it, exact same placement, exact same depth. Kofi's briefcase hit the floor. The sound of the briefcase made Amara spin around. For a long moment, neither of them breathed. The corridor noise, nurses calling out, a PA system humming, trolleys rolling past, seemed to fall into the background. There was only the space between them, charged and trembling, and the little boy who looked between the two adults with curious, unbothered eyes. "Kofi!" Amara's voice came out barely above a whisper. He said nothing. He was still looking at the child. "Kofi!" She said it again, and this time there was something else in her voice, something tight, something that sounded almost like fear. He finally pulled his eyes to her face. And for a moment he almost forgot everything, the 6 years, the silence, the grief, because she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever stood in front of. The kind of beautiful that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with the way a person occupied space. Amara had always filled a room without trying, but right now she looked terrified. "Whose child is that?" His voice came out low and flat. He barely recognized it. She opened her mouth, closed it. "Amara," he said her name like a warning. "Whose child is that?" "His name is Tobias," she said, and her voice broke slightly on the name. "That's not what I asked." The little boy, Tobias, was watching Kofi with wide, interested eyes. He had a small brown envelope in his hands that he'd picked up from the floor, holding it out proudly like he'd rescued a treasure. He had no idea what was happening between the two adults. Children never do. They just exist in the moment, innocent and unguarded, carrying truths in their faces that the adults around them have spent years trying to bury. "Mama," Tobias said, tugging Amara's sleeve. "Is this man okay? He looks sad." Amara closed her eyes. Kofi looked at the boy, at the dimple, at the eyes, dark brown, wide-set, the same shape as the ones he saw every morning in the mirror. "How old is he?" Kofi asked. Silence. "Amara, how old is he?" 5, she said, so quietly he almost missed it. 5. Kofi did the math before he even decided to. It happened automatically, the way breathing does. 6 years ago, she had disappeared before she disappeared. They had been together for 2 years, deeply, entirely, the kind of together that made people around them both envious and uncomfortable, because it was obvious and unapologetic. They had talked about the future, about children. About what their children would look like, her curls and his height, her laugh and his stubbornness. 5 years old. She had been pregnant when she left. The wall Kofi had spent 6 years building cracked straight down the middle. He picked up his briefcase from the floor. His hands were steadier than he expected. His chest was not. "We need to talk," he said. "Kofi, this isn't the place." "I know it isn't." He looked around a passing nurse. An elderly couple shuffling slowly toward the lift, a young doctor staring at his clipboard. "But I'm not walking away from this corridor until you tell me what is happening." Amara gathered the rest of the papers from the floor, shoving them back into the folder with shaking hands. She stood, straightened her blouse, and looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, something that was equal parts guilt, relief, and raw, unguarded pain. "Tobias," she said, crouching to the boy's level. "Do you remember the little play area near the coffee shop we passed?" Tobias nodded. "Go sit there for a few minutes, okay? I'll come get you. Don't talk to strangers. Don't leave the area." "Okay, Mama." He took off at a trot, yellow jacket bouncing, entirely unbothered. At the corner, he turned and waved at Kofi with the easy confidence of a child who has never been given a reason to distrust the world. Kofi waved back before he could stop himself. They moved to a quieter section of the corridor, near a window that looked out over the hospital's inner garden, bare trees, a fountain that wasn't running. Winter light falling gray and flat over everything. "Talk," Kofi said. Amara hugged the folder to her chest like a shield. "I don't know where to start. Start with why you left." She took a slow breath. "I didn't leave because I wanted to." "Then why? Director Bay?" She said the name like it cost her something. "He came to me 3 weeks before I disappeared. You were in Busan for that trade conference, remember? You were gone for 10 days. Kofi remembered. He had called her every night. "He came to my apartment," she continued. "He told me that you had been involved with another woman before me, that she was pregnant, that the child was yours. He said your family, your father, had arranged for you to marry her quietly, and that I was going to be told once you returned from Busan. He said if I made any noise about it, he would make sure my visa application was rejected, and my family back home would face consequences through business contacts he had." Kofi stared at her. "That's Amara, none of that was true." "I know that now. Director Bay had no power over my family's decisions. My father barely tolerated the man. He was a mid-level executive who got fired 8 months after you disappeared." "I know that now," she repeated. And her voice carried 6 years of weight in those 4 words. "Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me what he said?" "Because I was 23. I was in a country where I barely spoke the language. I was terrified, and I was—" She stopped. "You were what?" She looked at him directly for the first time. "I was 8 weeks pregnant, and I didn't know how to tell you, and then he came, and everything collapsed at once, and I panicked." The winter light fell between them. Somewhere down the corridor, Kofi could hear a child laughing, high and bright and entirely unaware. If you're feeling this story, do us a favor, hit that like button and subscribe. We're just getting to the part where everything changes. Kofi turned to the window. Below in the hospital garden, a sparrow landed on the edge of the dry fountain and sat there, completely still, as if it too was waiting for something. 8 weeks, he said. "Yes." "So when you left, I was carrying Tobias." She said it plainly, without decoration. Just the truth, standing there between them like something that had always been in the room. Kofi pressed his palm flat against the cold glass of the window. He needed something solid. He needed to feel the physical world pushing back against him because everything inside him had gone to a place beyond noise, a quiet, enormous, aching quiet. "Does he know?" he asked. "About me?" "He knows he has a father," she said carefully. "I never told him his father didn't want him. I never told him that. I told him his father lived far away and that one day, when the time was right, he would meet him." Kofi turned from the window. "You told him I lived far away?" "Yes. Amara, I was here. I never left. I have lived in this city for the past 6 years wondering what I did wrong." She pressed her lips together. A single tear escaped, and she caught it with the back of her hand swiftly, almost angrily, as if she was furious at herself for letting it out. "I came back 6 months ago," she said. "I've been in Accra since I left. My mother helped me raise Tobias. He grew up surrounded by family. He had a good childhood. He speaks 3 languages. He's the happiest boy you'll ever meet." "I'm not doubting that." His voice was rough. "I'm saying I missed it. I missed all of it." The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Both of them understood the weight of what was inside it, 5 years of a child's life. First steps, first words, first days of school. Fevers and recoveries and ordinary Tuesdays that Kofi would never get back. "Why did you come back?" he asked. She hesitated. Then she glanced down at the folder she was holding. Tobias has been having headaches, recurring ones. The doctors in Accra ran tests and found something they wanted a second opinion on. A specialist here came highly recommended. Kofi straightened. What kind of something? They think it might be a benign cyst near the brain stem. They're not certain yet, that's why we're here for the MRI results. His voice shifted entirely. Is he okay? Right now, is he okay? He's okay right now. He doesn't know anything is wrong. He just thinks we're on an adventure. Her voice broke on the last word just slightly, and she pressed her hand to her mouth for a moment. Kofi did not think. He crossed the 2 steps between them and put his arms around her. She stiffened for exactly 1 second. Then she folded. They stood like that for a long moment, not as lovers, not yet as anything defined, just as 2 people who had carried the same wound from opposite sides of the world and had finally, unexpectedly, found themselves standing in the same room with it. He let go first, stepped back, straightened his jacket. Which specialist? He asked. Dr. Song Ji-won, she's the head of pediatric neurology here. I know her, he said it without drama. She treated a colleague's daughter last year. She's one of the best in the country. Amara looked at him. You know her? I'll ask to speak with her directly. I can make sure Tobias gets every resource this hospital has. He said it the way he said most things, not as a boast, just as a fact. Kofi had always been the kind of man who solved problems by moving toward them. Kofi, you don't have to. He's my son. He said it out loud for the first time, and the words hit the air between them and stayed there. Solid and real and irreversible, Amara closed her eyes. He's my son, Kofi said again, quieter this time, as if he was saying it for himself as much as for her. And if there is something wrong with him, I am not standing at a distance. I'm not doing that. I've already stood at a distance for 5 years without knowing I was doing it. I'm not choosing it now. She opened her eyes. What does that mean for us? I don't know yet, he said honestly. I'm not ready to answer that question. I'm still standing here trying to understand what today even is. But I know what it means for Tobias. It means he's not going to walk out of this hospital without knowing who his father is. Down the corridor, Tobias appeared at the corner, peering around to check on his mother. When he saw Amara, he relaxed. Then he saw Kofi and offered a small, curious wave. Kofi waved back again. He does that, Amara said softly. He always checks. He has this thing where he likes to know everyone around him is okay before he goes back to whatever he's doing. Kofi watched the boy disappear back around the corner. He gets that from you, Amara said. Kofi looked at her. What? That thing. The checking, you used to do it at parties. Walk around the room to make sure everyone had a drink, everyone was comfortable before you'd let yourself relax. She gave him a small, sad smile. He's never met you and he already does the things you do. Kofi said nothing. He looked back at the corner where Tobias had been standing and the wall inside him cracked a little further. They found Tobias in the small waiting area near the coffee cart, sitting cross-legged on a plastic chair, drawing something in a small notebook he'd produced from nowhere, the tip of his tongue pressed to his upper lip in concentration. When Amara and Kofi approached, he looked up and the dimple appeared immediately. Mama, I drew a bird. There's a bird in the garden outside. Did you see it? I saw it, Kofi said before Amara could respond. Tobias turned his full attention to Kofi with the fearless directness that small children have before the world teaches them to be guarded. Do you like birds? I do, Kofi said, crouching to the boy's eye level. What kind of bird was it? Tobias thought very seriously. A small brown one with a round belly. A sparrow, Kofi said. Is that a good bird? One of the best. They don't have the flashiest feathers, but they're everywhere. They survive everything. Winter, storms. Cities, sparrows always find a way. Tobias considered this with great solemnity. I like that. He held out his notebook. You can have the drawing if you want. I can draw another one. Kofi took the notebook. On the page was a small, enthusiastically scrawled bird, round and brown and slightly lopsided, standing on what appeared to be a very large fountain. This is very good, Kofi said, and he meant it. I know, Tobias said with the complete, unironic confidence of a 5-year-old who has been genuinely encouraged his entire life. Kofi stood. He looked at Amara over the top of the boy's head, and she was watching him with an expression so complicated he could not name all of what was in it, grief and wonder and something that looked dangerously close to hope. Tobias, Amara said gently, this is Kofi. He's someone Mama knows. Tobias looked at Kofi with fresh assessment. Are you a friend? Kofi held the boy's gaze. I'm going to be, he said. Just then, a nurse appeared at the end of the corridor. Ms. Amara Mensah, Dr. Song is ready to see you now. Amara straightened. Her hand found Tobias's automatically. I'm coming with you, Kofi said. She looked at him, a beat of silence. Okay, she said. They walked down the corridor together, Amara on one side, Kofi on the other. Tobias between them holding his mother's hand and swinging it gently, humming something tuneless and cheerful under his breath. Completely unaware that the three of them walking together like this was either the beginning of something or the quiet resolution of something very long and very painful. Maybe both. The hospital lights buzzed softly overhead, somewhere behind them. The folder with the scattered papers sat closed on the plastic chair where Amara had set it down, a photograph resting on top. A photograph of a younger Amara and a man who looked remarkably like the man now walking beside her. Taken at a rooftop restaurant in Itaewon on a summer evening 6 years ago when everything had still been whole. Dr. Song Ji-won was a small, precise woman with reading glasses perched at the end of her nose and the kind of calm that only comes from decades of delivering difficult news in careful human ways. She looked at Kofi when they entered, then at Amara, then at Tobias. And she made no comment on the configuration. They sat. The MRI results, she began, are actually more reassuring than the initial scans suggested. Amara's hand tightened around Tobias's. Kofi noticed, without thinking. He placed his hand over hers, not intrusively, just there. Steady, she didn't pull away. The cyst is small, Dr. Song continued, and it is showing no signs of growth or pressure on surrounding tissue. In cases like this, particularly with a child this age and this level of neurological health, we recommend a monitoring protocol over surgical intervention. Scans every 6 months for the next 2 years. If it remains stable, which, based on what I'm seeing, I believe it will, Tobias should live a completely normal life. Amara exhaled. It was a long, shaking exhale that she clearly had been holding for weeks. So he's okay? She asked. He's okay, Dr. Song said, with the kind of smile that carried the full weight of knowing what she was giving back to a parent. He's a healthy, bright boy. We'll keep watching, but I see nothing here that concerns me in the immediate term. Tobias, who had been sitting beside his mother drawing in his notebook throughout the entire conversation, looked up. Can we get Jae Jajangmyeon after this? Mama promised. Dr. Song laughed. Kofi laughed. Even Amara laughed, and it came out wet and bright at the same time, the laugh of someone who has been wound too tight for too long and has just felt the tension snap loose. Yes, baby, Amara said, pulling him into her side. We can get Jae Jajangmyeon? They thanked Dr. Song and stepped into the corridor. Amara stood against the wall with Tobias tucked under her arm, her eyes closed, breathing slowly. Kofi stood beside her. Good news, he said quietly. Good news. She agreed without opening her eyes. A long silence. Have Jae Jajangmyeon with us, Tobias announced, looking up at Kofi with absolute authority. You should come, Mama, tell him to come. Tobias, he knows about sparrows, Tobias said, as if this settled the matter entirely. Kofi looked at Amara. She opened her eyes and looked back at him, and for a moment the hospital corridor fell away entirely. The nurses, the trolleys, the PA system. All of it, and there was only the question of what came next. Sitting between them like an open door neither of them was certain they deserved to walk through. Come, she said finally, quietly. Please, he nodded. Tobias grabbed Kofi's hand without ceremony, the way children do when they have decided a person is safe, and began pulling him toward the exit. Do you know what Jae Jajangmyeon is? He demanded. I do, Kofi said. Good. I'll teach you how to eat it correctly. You have to mix it fast or it gets sticky. I'll follow your lead, Kofi said. Behind them, Amara watched her son drag this man she had loved and lost and been broken by toward the hospital exit. Chattering about noodles, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, and she cried very quietly, very briefly for all the time that was gone, and then she straightened, and she followed them. The noodle restaurant was small and warm, wedged between a pharmacy and a convenience store 3 blocks from the hospital. It smelled of black bean sauce and fried onions and the particular comfort of food that has been made the same way for 40 years. They sat at a table by the window, Tobias across from Kofi, Amara beside her son, a bowl of Jae Jajangmyeon in front of each of them. Tobias supervised Kofi's mixing technique with grave seriousness, correcting his angle twice before declaring it acceptable. "Good," Tobias said, nodding. "Now you won't waste it." "Thank you," Kofi said solemnly. They ate. And then in the easy silence that follows shared food, Tobias looked up at Kofi and said, with the casual profundity of children who haven't learned yet to soften hard questions, "Are you my father?" The restaurant carried on around them, the hiss of a kitchen, someone laughing at a back table, a radio playing something low and familiar. Amara set her chopsticks down. Kofi looked at the boy, at the dimple, at the face that had been walking around in the world for 5 years carrying pieces of him he had never known were missing. "Yes," he said, "I am." Tobias considered this for a moment. He picked up a piece of radish and chewed it thoughtfully. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Amara said softly. "Mama said I'd meet him one day." Tobias shrugged with the magnificent simplicity of a child whose mother has told him the truth in the gentlest possible way. "I just didn't know it was today." He looked at Kofi again. "Do you live in Seoul?" "I do. So you're close." "Very close." Tobias nodded, satisfied. "Good, I have football on Saturdays. You can come watch." Kofi's throat tightened. "I would really like that." The rest of the meal was warm and ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Tobias explaining the rules of his Saturday football league with passionate detail, correcting Kofi's Korean pronunciation twice, asking 14 questions about what Kofi's job involved and whether it was boring or exciting. Kofi said both. Tobias approved of this answer. Amara watched them. She did not say much. She didn't need to. When the bowls were empty and Tobias had excused himself to use the bathroom, Kofi leaned forward and rested his forearms on the table. "I'm not going to pretend the past 6 years didn't happen," he said. "I'm not going to tell you it's all fine and we just go forward like nothing occurred, because I'm hurt, Amara. I'm genuinely deeply hurt." She nodded. "You should be. But I need you to know that I understand. I understand you were scared and alone and someone lied to you and used that fear against you. I'm not placing all of this at your feet." She looked at him steadily. "What I want," he continued, "is to be his father fully, properly. Whatever that looks like from here. And beyond that, we take it slow, one day at a time. Can you do that?" She reached across the table. Her fingers rested lightly against his hand. "One day at a time," she agreed. Tobias came back from the bathroom, climbed into his seat, and looked between them. "Are you two going to be friends now?" "We're going to try," Kofi said. Tobias seemed to accept this as reasonable. He picked up his juice. "Okay, but if you argue, you have to do it quietly. I don't like loud arguing." "Fair enough," Kofi said. Amara laughed, real and full this time, nothing wet in it, just light. And Kofi thought sitting in that small, warm restaurant with the smell of black bean sauce in the air, and his son explaining the offside rule to him with tremendous authority, that maybe the worst thing that ever happened to him had carried inside it, without him knowing. The best thing he had ever been given. He looked at Tobias. At the dimple, he thought, "I would have loved you from the very first second." He knew somehow that he already had. It happened on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday. Not a Tuesday with storm clouds gathering or wind picking up or any of the cinematic signals that should accompany the kind of moment that dismantles a man's understanding of his own life. It was just a Tuesday, gray winter sky, the smell of sesame oil drifting from a street cart 2 blocks from the hospital, Tobias wearing his yellow jacket and eating a custard pastry that was leaving flakes on his chin, and Kofi walking beside them both like something had finally, after 6 long years, clicked back into place inside him. They had been to another checkup. Doctor Song had reviewed the latest scan and nodded with the careful satisfaction of a doctor who had expected good news and received it. The cyst was unchanged. Tobias was fine. Amara had exhaled so deeply when they stepped into the corridor that Kofi heard it like a wind leaving a room. They had walked out of the hospital through the main lobby, the 3 of them, their footsteps falling into the same unhurried rhythm that had been building quietly over the past 2 weeks since the noodle restaurant, since Tobias had asked his question and Kofi had answered it, since something unnamed but enormous had begun to settle between them like soil after rain. Tobias was explaining something about a cartoon character who turned into a dragon. Kofi was listening with complete attention, asking the follow-up questions that Tobias required of his audience. Amara walked on the other side of the boy. watching Kofi without looking like she was watching him, the way people look at things they are not yet ready to fully believe in. They were almost at the lobby doors when Tobias stopped. He stopped the way children stop, not because something told him to, but because something caught his attention and his whole body simply obeyed that attention completely. The way only children and animals can. He was looking to the left, toward the wide sitting area near the main reception desk, where a row of chairs lined the wall beside a large window. In one of those chairs, positioned slightly apart from the others, as if the space around him had been cleared by the weight of his presence, sat an elderly Korean man in a wheelchair. He was in his late 70s, perhaps his 80s. His suit was dark and precise, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly rent, but it hung on him now the way good suits hang on men who have lost weight they did not intend to lose. His hands rested on his knees, large-knuckled. Deliberate hands, the hands of someone who had spent decades making decisions that moved large things. His head was slightly bowed and his lips were moving. He was praying, not performing prayer, actually praying the private kind. The kind that happens in hospital waiting rooms when the person doing it has run out of other options and has arrived, after a long life of self-sufficiency, at the doorstep of something bigger than themselves. "Mama," Tobias said quietly. "That man is sad," Amara looked. "Yes, baby, people come to hospitals when they're going through hard things." Tobias considered this. He ate another piece of his pastry. He looked at the man for another moment. And then, because he was 5 years old and had not yet learned that the world rewards distance and punishes tenderness, he simply walked over. "Tobias," Amara started, but he was already there. He stood in front of the wheelchair, close enough that the old man could not miss him, and looked up at the lined face with the same fearless curiosity he brought to everything. The man's eyes opened. He looked down. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Tobias said, "Are you okay?" The old man's expression shifted. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile and not quite grief. Something in between, the face of a person who has not been asked a simple, honest question in a very long time. "Not today," the old man said. His Korean was precise, unhurried. "But some days are better." Tobias nodded. He seemed to accept this as a reasonable answer. He climbed without invitation onto the edge of the low window ledge beside the wheelchair and sat there, making himself level with the old man's eyeline, the way he instinctively did with adults he wanted to talk to properly. "My name is Tobias," he said. "What's yours?" "Do-yun." The man said, "Yun Do-yun." Kofi had gone still 3 steps behind. He knew that name. Everyone in Seoul's business community knew that name. Yun Do-yun was the founder of Yun Group, a conglomerate that had its fingers in construction, pharmaceuticals, and media. He was also, according to everything Kofi had ever heard about him, a man who had built an empire and was now watching it become something he no longer recognized. Because the son he had groomed to inherit it had spent the last several years becoming someone no one could predict. Amara reached Kofi's side. He felt her arrive before he saw her. "Do you know who that is?" he said quietly. "No," she said. Then she looked at the face more carefully, at the name badge on the lanyard hanging from the wheelchair's handle, at the subtle deference of the nurse standing 10 feet away. "Oh," she said, and her voice changed. Neither of them moved toward Tobias. They didn't want to startle the moment. There was something happening in front of them that felt precarious and sacred simultaneously. The way moments involving children and very old people sometimes do, as if the two ends of life recognize something in each other that the middle years have forgotten. Do-yun was talking to Tobias now, asking him something. Tobias was answering with his hands. The pastry was being gestured with. Do-yun's expression was doing something none of the nurses who worked with him had likely seen recently. It was softening. Not with pity, not with performance, but with genuine warmth, the way faces soften when they encounter something they were beginning to believe no longer existed. Do-yun said something. Tobias laughed, that full, uncomplicated laugh that arrived without warning and left the room brighter than it had found it. Do-yun laughed too, quietly, as if he was remembering how, and then Tobias, with the casual warmth of a child who has always been surrounded by people who loved him without condition, leaned forward and put both arms around the old man's neck in a hug. Do-yun went completely still. His hands hovered for a moment, those large, deliberate hands, suspended on either side of the boy's small back, uncertain, as if they had forgotten the choreography of this particular gesture. Then they came down. They rested on the boy's back with the careful tenderness of a man who understood in that moment exactly what he was holding and exactly what he had lost. "Haraboji," Tobias murmured into the old man's collar. "Grandfather." Not because he knew the word, not because anyone had taught it to him for this occasion, but because it was the right word, the word that fit the feeling, the way children find language not from instruction but from instinct. Du-yun's breath broke. Just once, a single crack in the careful composure that 80 years of power and grief and survival had built around him. He pressed one hand lightly against the back of the boy's head, that hand, those knuckles, and closed his eyes. Amara made a sound beside Kofi that was not quite a word. Kofi did not say anything. He was watching the old man's face. He was watching something he could not name. And the thing he could not name was beginning to make him cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the lobby. Tobias pulled back, looked at Du-yun's face, saw that his eyes were wet. Reached up with one small finger and touched the old man's cheek with the absolute seriousness of a child who has decided that this is his job right now. "It's okay," Tobias said. "Sometimes I cry too. My mama says it just means something matters." Du-yun looked at the boy. He looked at him the way people look at photographs, the way you look at something that contains a message you cannot quite read but are certain is addressed to you. His eyes moved over the boy's face with a slow, careful attention. The brow, the jaw, the line of the nose, the placement of the eyes, the dimple. Du-yun's breath changed. It was subtle, a tightening, an intake. A fraction of a second where his entire body rearranged itself around something it had just encountered. Amara saw it. Kofi saw it. The nurse across the room did not. "Child," Du-yun said. His voice was very careful. "Who is your mother?" Tobias pointed. "Her over there, the one with the braids." Du-yun looked up. His eyes found Amara. Amara did not move, but every piece of color that had been in her face since she stepped into the warm lobby left it in approximately 1 second. She knew then. Kofi could see that she knew. Whatever she had been carrying quietly for 5 years had just become something she could no longer carry quietly. "Come," Du-yun said to the nurse. His voice returned to its precise, composed register. "Bring them chairs." What happened next took 40 minutes, but it felt both longer and shorter than that simultaneously, the way significant things always distort time. Du-yun spoke. Amara mostly did not. Kofi sat slightly apart from them both, close enough to hear everything, and he listened with the specific quality of attention that belongs to someone who already suspects what the conclusion is going to be and is spending the listening time grieving it in advance. Du-yun explained, with the efficiency of a man who has spent a lifetime managing crisis, that he had been admitted for cardiac monitoring 3 days earlier, that his doctors wanted to keep him under observation for another week, that he had been sitting in this lobby because his room felt too small and the window in it faced the wrong direction. He explained that he had a son, Ju-won, 34 years old. That Ju-won had left Korea 18 months ago under circumstances that Du-yun described with a practiced neutrality that covered something enormous. You could hear the enormity in the space between his words. The way you can hear ocean through a wall if you stand close enough. He explained that before Ju-won left, there had been a woman his son had been involved with. That Du-yun had never met her. That Ju-won had told him very little. But that in the year before Ju-won disappeared, Du-yun had noticed his son changing, becoming harder, more erratic, spending money strangely. Arriving at family dinners with the particular volatility of someone who is managing something internally and failing. He stopped. He looked at Tobias, who had found a pen in someone's bag and was drawing on the back of a hospital pamphlet. Entirely self-contained. "The boy's features," Du-yun said directly and without cruelty. "They are familiar to me." The lobby noise continued around them. A PA system called a name. Someone walked past with a trolley. The world outside the four of them continued at its ordinary pace, indifferent to what was being said. Amara said, "Mr. Yun." "I am not making an accusation," Du-yun said. "I am making an observation, and I am requesting if you are willing. A simple test, a mouth swab, it takes 30 seconds. The results take 48 hours. "Mama," Tobias said without looking up from his drawing. "I drew another bird. This one has a hat." Amara looked at her son. She looked at him with the expression of a woman looking at something she has built with her whole life, something precious and hers, and feeling, for the first time, the particular terror of the thing being looked at by someone who might have a claim. Kofi said nothing. He could not say anything. He was sitting very still. And inside the stillness, he was dismantling and rebuilding the last 2 weeks at high speed. The noodle restaurant, the Dimple, his own answer to a 5-year-old's question. The way he had felt something slot into place inside him that he had not known was missing until it returned. He was looking at Tobias's profile, at the jaw, at the nose, at the particular angle of the forehead. He was doing what Do-yeon had just done, only he was doing it in reverse, not discovering a resemblance but questioning one. Amara stood up. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to the room for a long moment. Her arms crossed over her chest, her braids falling forward. Then she turned around. Her face was not the face of someone who had been surprised. It was the face of someone who had been found. 2 weeks, she said. Before I came to this hospital the first time, before Tobias got sick, before any of this. She paused. 2 weeks before that, I ran into Kofi at a mutual friend's gallery opening. It was the first time I had seen him since I left Seoul. Kofi looked up. We talked for 3 hours, she said. In a corner, away from everyone. He was the first person I had spoken to in years who had known me before everything, before I left, before Tobias. She stopped. Pressed her lips together. I told him about Tobias that night. I didn't tell him who the father was. I told him the father was someone who had hurt me and that I had left and that the boy was mine and I was doing fine. She looked at Kofi now. Directly, without flinching. Kofi assumed, she said. And I let him assume because it was easier, because what he was assuming felt safer than the truth, because the truth, her voice broke slightly, she held it together. The truth was that I had been with someone before Kofi and I found each other again. Someone I had been trying to leave for 2 years, someone I had built my whole escape from Seoul around. The lobby was very quiet. Tobias had stopped drawing. He was watching his mother with the particular attention of a child who does not understand the words, but understands completely that something important is happening in the room. His name is Ju-won, Amara said. Do-yeon closed his eyes. He found me in Accra, she continued. 6 months after Tobias was born, he came to my mother's house. He stood outside on the street for 2 days before I agreed to speak to him through the gate. He told me he had changed. He cried. He said things that men like him learn to say when they need the door to open again. She shook her head. I didn't open it. I told him to go. He did. He sent money for 2 years. I sent it back every time. And then he stopped. And I thought that was the end. It was not the end, Do-yeon said quietly, a statement, not a question. No, she agreed. He came back again 8 months ago. He knew I was returning to Seoul. He had people watching, I don't know how. I don't know who, but he knew. He sent a message saying if I came back, he would use his family's resources to take Tobias from me. She looked at Do-yeon. I don't know if you knew about that. I did not, Do-yeon said. His voice had gone very flat. The flatness of a man containing enormous anger through enormous practice. My son and I have not spoken in 14 months, Amara nodded. I came back anyway, because Tobias needed the specialist. Because I was not going to let fear make medical decisions for my child. She looked at her hands. I did not expect to walk into Kofi. I did not plan any of this. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. You could feel the weight of it against your skin. Kofi stood up. He walked to the window. He stood beside Amara. He looked out at the hospital garden, at the dry fountain. At the bench where a sparrow had landed and sat perfectly still. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was very low and very even, and only someone who had known him would have heard what it was costing him to keep it that way. When Tobias asked me at the restaurant, he said, when he asked if I was his father, you let me answer yes. Amara said nothing. You were standing right there, he said, and you let me look at that boy and say yes. I know, she said. Amara. I know, Kofi. He turned to look at her face. She was not hiding from it. She was standing in it, whatever it was, with the posture of someone who has known this moment was coming and has decided the only thing she can offer it is the truth. The whole truth, even now that it is arriving dressed in rubble. I was going to tell you, she said. I was trying to find the way. Every day for the past 2 weeks I was. She stopped, started again. There is no version of those words that lands gently, I know that, And I kept telling myself one more day until I found the right way, and then one more day. Kofi looked at her for a long time, then he looked at Tobias. Tobias had gotten up from the chair. He had come to stand beside his mother with his small hand pressed flat against her hip, not tugging, not demanding attention, just there, just present, the way he was when he sensed she needed the weight of him. He was looking up at Kofi with wide, serious eyes, and on his face was the dimple faint at rest, the one that Kofi had seen in his own mirror for 32 years. He looked at Du-Yun. Du-Yun met his gaze without apology, without triumph. Without anything except the exhausted honesty of a very old man who has been sitting in a hospital lobby praying for something he did not know how to name, and may have just found it in the most complicated form imaginable. "The test," Kofi said. Du-Yun nodded. "Do it," Kofi said. "Whatever the result is, do it." Amira made a sound that was not a word. Kofi did not look at her. He was looking at Tobias. At the face that had reorganized his entire understanding of his own life in the space of 2 weeks, at the boy who had given him a crayon drawing of a sparrow and told him sparrows survive everything. He thought, "I already love him. Whatever this test says, I already love him." He thought, "That's the worst part. That's the part that's going to be the hardest to carry." He said nothing. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked out at the garden. The sparrow was still on the fountain. The results came back on a Thursday. Dr. Song was not the doctor who delivered them. This was a different department, a different room, a different kind of news. The genetics counselor was a woman named Dr. Park with a careful voice and a box of tissues on her desk that neither Kofi nor Amara touched, because they were both past the kind of grief that reaches for tissues. They were in the territory of grief that sits very still and does not make a sound. 99.4%. Paternal match, Yun Ju-won. The room went dead silent, not the silence of surprise, not the silence of shock. The silence of confirmation, which is its own particular species of silence, heavier than shock because shock still has the warmth of disbelief inside it, whereas confirmation is cold all the way through. It is the silence of a door closing on something that had still, until that moment, been technically possible. Kofi sat very still in his chair. Amara sat beside him, and she was not looking at the paper. She was looking at her hands. She had been looking at her hands since they walked into this room, since she already knew what the paper was going to say, and had spent the last 48 hours saying goodbye to the version of events in which it said something different. The counselor spoke. She said careful, professional things. She offered resources. She mentioned support. Her words entered the room and moved around in it and did not land on either of the 2 people in the chairs because neither of them was available for words right now. Kofi said, "Thank you." He stood up. He was very correct about it. He was the kind of correct that belongs to people who were raised to conduct themselves in certain ways regardless of what is happening underneath. Those ways, and right now underneath those ways, was a man standing in a field he had thought was his and finding out, with a piece of paper and a percentage, that the field had never had his name on it. He walked out of the room. He did not walk fast. He did not slam anything. He walked down the corridor with his hands at his sides and his face arranged the way faces are arranged when the person inside them is taking inventory of an enormous loss and has not yet decided what to do with what they find. He walked to the end of the corridor. He stopped at the window, the same garden, the same bare trees, the fountain still dry, still gray. He stood there for a long time. Amara found him there 20 minutes later. She did not approach immediately. She stood a few feet back, the way you stand near something that is in pain and you are not sure if your presence will help or make it worse. She had Tobias with her. The boy was leaning against her leg. Quiet in the particular way he went quiet when the adults around him were carrying something heavy, the instinctive courtesy of a child who understands more than he has words for. "Kofi," she said. He did not turn around. "I need to say something," she said, "and I need to say it without you looking at me if that's okay, because I am not sure I can get through it if you look at me." He said nothing, which she took as permission. "Ju-won and I were together for 2 years, she said. "He was brilliant and charming, and he made me feel in the beginning like I was the only person in any room. That is the thing about men like him. They are extraordinary until they are not, and by the time they become what they really are. You are already so far inside the relationship that getting out feels like surgery without anesthetic." She paused. "He hit me 3 times in 2 years. which I know sounds like 3 is a small number until you have been hit by someone who told you he loved you, and then you understand that 3 is an enormous number. The third time was the last time. Because the third time I was 6 weeks pregnant and I understood that I would die in that apartment or I would leave it, and those were the only 2 options. Kofi had turned slightly, not fully. His profile was toward her now, his jaw tight, the muscle in his cheek working. "I left the next morning," she said. "While he was sleeping. I took 2 bags and my passport and I called a taxi and I went to the airport and I booked the next flight to Accra and I got on it. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, not my friends, not my colleagues, not Director Bay, though I understand now that Director Bay had his own reasons for wanting me gone." She took a breath. "And I did not tell you because I was ashamed. Because I had spent 2 years with someone who had been hurting me and I had stayed, and I did not know how to explain that to someone who had loved me the way you loved me. I did not know how to say there was someone between us. And what he did to me is the reason I ran, and his name is on that boy and I have been trying to outrun that name for 5 years." Kofi turned fully. He looked at her. He looked at Tobias, who was watching him with enormous eyes. One hand still flat against his mother's leg, the crayon drawings in his other hand because he had been working on a new one while they waited. Kofi went down on one knee. He went down on one knee in the hospital corridor, on the cold floor. And he put himself at eye level with the boy who was not his son and who was, and who would never be and who already was, which is the most complicated sentence a human heart can contain, and Kofi's heart was containing it, and it was enormous. And it was real, and it was the kind of hurt that happens only to people who had the capacity to love something completely. "Tobias," he said. "Yes," Tobias said. "You know that drawing you gave me of the sparrow?" Tobias nodded, very seriously. "I still have it," Kofi said. "I'm going to keep it." Tobias looked at him. He assessed him the way he assessed everything, with full, unashamed attention. Then he held out the new drawing. This one showed 2 birds, one large, one small, both on the fountain. The large one had its wings slightly extended, the way birds do when they are sheltering something smaller beside them. "That one is for you too," Tobias said. "The big bird is you, the small one is me. Because you know about sparrows." Kofi took the drawing. He held it in both hands. He held it very carefully, the way he had held the first one, and he did not look up for a moment because he needed that moment to be a moment that no one else saw. When he looked up, his eyes were cleared, which is different. He stood. He looked at Amara. "This is going to take time," he said. "What you did, the not telling me, I'm not past it. I'm not going to pretend I'm past it because that would be a dishonest thing to say, and we are apparently done with dishonest things." She nodded. "But the boy," he said. He looked at Tobias, at the yellow jacket, at the dimple faint at rest, on the face that was not carrying his blood but was, somehow, inexplicably, in a way that biology had no framework for, already carrying something of him, the way the boy had been carrying it since before they met. The questions. The checking on people, the knowing about birds. "Whatever happens between you and me, whatever this looks like from here, the boy doesn't lose me. That's not something I'm negotiating." He asked me a question and I answered it, and that answer still stands regardless of what the paper said. Amara pressed her hand over her mouth. Tobias put his hand in Kofi's. He just did it. No ceremony, no announcement. He put his hand in Kofi's the way he put his hand in Amara's. Because it was there. And because he wanted to. And because 5 years of being raised by a woman who told him the truth in gentle ways had made him someone who moved toward things, rather than away from them. They stood there, the 3 of them, in the corridor of Seoul General Hospital, while the world continued its ordinary proceedings around them. Nurses and trolleys and PA announcements and the quiet mechanical grief of a building that contains too much human pain to ever be still. And then from somewhere in the lobby behind them, very slowly, a wheelchair rounded the corner. Yun Do-yun. Alone, which meant he had sent the nurse away, which meant this was deliberate. He stopped his wheelchair 10 feet from them. He looked at Tobias. He said in a voice that had lost all of its precision and most of its composure, "My son does not deserve this boy." No one responded. "But I am not my son," he said. "I am his father, and I failed at that in ways I spend every hour of every day in this building accounting for. But I am also, if the paper means what I believe it means." He stopped. His jaw moved. His hands tightened on the wheels of the chair. I am also this child's grandfather, and I have been sitting in this hospital asking God for something worth staying alive for. The lobby was very quiet. Tobias looked at Duyun. He looked at his mother. He looked at Kofi. Mama, he said. Can the sad man be my Haraboji? He said some days are better. I think I can help with that. Amara made a sound she would later be unable to describe. Half sob, half laugh. The specific register of a person standing in the middle of the most complicated truth of their life and finding, against all probability, something small and warm and entirely unplanned, still managing to grow inside it. Kofi looked at Duyun. The old man met his gaze. Two men on opposite sides of the same impossible situation, both of them having lost something and both of them being offered, by the same small person in the yellow jacket, a version of something back. Kofi nodded. Not permission. He had no right to give permission. But recognition, the recognition of one person to another that they are both, somehow, still here, still standing, still carrying what they were given to carry, and that the carrying, however painful, is also proof of something. Tobias walked over to Duyun's wheelchair. He climbed up onto the armrest, the way he had climbed onto the window ledge, and sat there with the easy authority of someone who has decided where he belongs. I'll teach you my bird drawings, he said to Duyun, but you have to get better paper. Hospital pamphlets are not good enough. Duyun looked at the boy beside him, and for the second time that week in the same lobby he laughed, 2 weeks later. Juwon called, not Amara, Kofi. Kofi did not know how he had got the number. He suspected Duyun, though when he asked the old man about it later. Duyun gave him the expression of someone who has done something he knows was right and is prepared to be accountable for it. The call came at 7 in the morning. Kofi was making coffee. He looked at the unknown number for 2 rings and then answered it, because he had decided somewhere in the previous 14 days that he was no longer going to avoid the things that were hard. You're the one with my son, Juwon said. No greeting. His Korean was smooth and educated with the flat affect of someone who has spent a long time not feeling things and has become expert at sounding like that was a choice. No, Kofi said. I'm not with your son. Your son is with his mother. She's back in Seoul. She is. And you're present, Kofi said. I'm present, that's the word. A silence. She won't take my calls, Juwon said. I'm aware. He's my son. The DNA says so, yes, Kofi said. The DNA says a lot of things. It doesn't say anything about what you did or who you are or what you gave up when you gave it up. Another silence, longer. I need to, Juwon started. No, Kofi said. His voice was very calm. The calmness of a man who has made a decision from a place of complete clarity and knows the difference between that and coldness. Whatever you need, that's a conversation you have with a professional, and then you have it with Amara at her pace. On her terms, if she ever decides she wants to have it. I am not the channel for that. I'm telling you this clearly because I think you are a person who operates better with clarity than with ambiguity. Tobias is not going to be used as a bargaining position. Not with her, not with your father, not with me. Whatever you do next, you do it without that boy as leverage. Do you understand me? The line was very quiet. Then Juwon said, Who are you to him? Kofi thought about a crayon drawing, 2 sparrows, one with its wing extended. I'm the one who stayed, he said. That's who I am to him. He ended the call. He stood in his kitchen. He drank his coffee, outside his window. Seoul was doing its morning things, buses and bicycle bells, and the smell of street food starting its day. The ordinary texture of a city that had been moving around his grief for 6 years without knowing it was there. His phone buzzed. A message from Amara. A photograph, Tobias at the kitchen table in her apartment, bent over a large sheet of paper, tongue to upper lip in concentration, drawing something enormous and ambitious that involved what appeared to be 3 birds. A fountain and something that might have been a hospital or might have been a castle. Below the photo, she had typed, He asked me this morning if you were coming for breakfast. I told him I didn't know. He said, tell him sparrows eat in the morning. Kofi looked at the message for a long time. Then he picked up his keys. He did not have answers yet. He did not have a plan for what he and Amara were or what they would be. Or whether the wound of the last 2 weeks was the kind that heals, or the kind that leaves a scar wide enough to live inside. He did not know what Juwon would do or what Duyun's health would look like in 6 months, or how you explain to a 5-year-old, in terms that are both honest and kind, the full complexity of the world he had been born into. He did not know any of those things. He knew that a boy in a yellow jacket had handed him a drawing of a bird and told him that sparrows survive everything. He knew that the statement had been made without agenda, without philosophy, without the weight of meaning, just a child telling a man a thing he had learned about birds. He knew that the statement had been true anyway. He rang Amara's doorbell at 7:45 in the morning. Tobias answered it, which meant Amara had let him reach the door first, which meant she had known Kofi was coming, which meant something. Tobias looked up at him. "You came," he said, with the tone of someone whose expectations have been met, which is rarer and more significant than surprise. "I came," Kofi said. "Good," Tobias said. He turned and walked back toward the kitchen, entirely without ceremony. "I'm drawing a castle, but I need someone to hold the paper still." "Mama keeps moving her elbow." Kofi stepped inside. He closed the door behind him, and somewhere in the city, on the edge of a dry fountain in a hospital garden, sitting in the gray winter light with the absolute stillness of a creature that has survived every season it has ever been given, a sparrow ruffled its feathers once, and settled and stayed. If this story cracked something open in you, if you felt the weight of it in your chest, hit that like button. It costs nothing and it means everything. Subscribe so the next chapter finds you. And comment below who broke your heart more, Kofi, Amara, or Juwon. We read every single one. See you in the next story.